All right, hey guys, what's up? I'm joined today once again by Phil Gurski. Am I pronouncing that last name correctly?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and we chatted in the past once about what was our last chat about? Um,
Mostly about the sort of Iran, what was happening after the Iranian shoot down of
oh,
that airliner.
Soleimani. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. And then you emailed me. You reached out about chatting about I guess like curious things going on with I guess the lack of terrorist attacks over the COVID-19
Yeah.
stuff. Or
Yeah. Everyone was calling for, when the economy went down, which means that people weren't going to work, including your law enforcement and security services. A lot of people said this is going to be the next harbinger of a terrorist wave. And guess what? We haven't seen it, which is really kind of curious. So maybe some of the experts were wrong when they called for this prediction back in March and April.
mm-hmm. What so when you emailed me, it was specifically in regards to like I guess like incel terrorist attacks or kind of the
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So, so what happened was back in February of this year, a young man. So he's a young offender under Canadian law, so we can't name him. His identity is protected.
Mm-hmm.
He went into an erotic massage parlor in Toronto, and he stabbed to death one woman and injured another. So he was charged with first-degree murder and attempted murder. And then about a month ago, the Crown, which is the prosecution here in Canada, decided to change the charges from first-degree murder to first-degree murder for terrorist purposes
Mm-hmm.
because I guess they found out something on his laptop or something in interviewing him whereby he apparently was one of these incels, these so-called involuntary celibates.
Mm-hmm.
And then they decided that that constitutes an act of terrorism, and therefore they changed the charges. So he's actually been charged with terrorism, which led to this, incredible debate in Canada. I don't know if you've had it there in the States as well. Are incels terrorists or are they just hateful misogynists? And is there a difference between the two? So I had a really fascinating conversation with a woman called Nama Cates. I don't know if you've heard of her, Stephen. She runs a thing called the Incel Project.
Mm-hmm.
And she's talked to hundreds of these guys, like hundreds and hundreds of these guys. And she told me that, first of all, the vast majority are not violent.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very few acts of violence where people actually kill women or others, like Elliot Rogers back in California back in 2014, I think. Most of these guys, she said, are just lonely guys who want to talk to somebody. They're not good at relationships.
Mm-hmm.
They're not good with relations with the other sex. And they're just kind of lonely guys that need either a shoulder to cry on or a friendly ear to listen to. So the bottom line is that there really is no consensus. And I've talked to a lot of people around the world on this. There's no consensus that incel violence, as rare as it is, constitutes terrorism. And then the bigger issue here is if you call it terrorism, then the FBI and CSIS, so the Canadian Security Intelligence Service in my country, have to start looking at it because that's what they do for a living.
Mm-hmm.
And my pushback was, why don't just treat this as a hate crime? I mean, we have all kinds of hate crimes, right? We have hate crimes against ethnic groups. We have hate crimes against LGBT. Why not just treat this as another hate crime? Why lop it into the whole terrorism thing? And a lot of people got very angry with me for not calling it terrorism. But I just think that the argument's still out there that, I don't know. Do we call everything terrorism these days? Is Antifa terrorism, as the president says? That's a great question, right?
Yeah, terrorism seems like it's a really loaded term. Some people want to use it for moral reasons, so I can understand why people get upset if you don't call it terrorism, especially because it's a white person and
old white guy.
Yeah, so like in the U.S. at least, it seems like we're hesitant sometimes to like how people use different descriptors for different types of people.
Yeah.
If a white kid shoots up a school, he's mentally troubled. If a black person does it, it's just because he's a crazy murderer. If a brown person does it, it's because he was a terrorist or Islamic extremist. Like people will drop these without knowing anything more about the person. So I can imagine that probably that plays into it a little bit. In the United States, more specifically, I think for our terrorist designation, legally speaking, I think a terrorist has to be somebody that is getting support or joining a movement that exists overseas.
You're right.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that in your country is your First Amendment, which is very, very strong, right?
Mm-hmm.
Protection of freedom of speech, freedom of expression. We don't have a First Amendment here in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
We have a charter, which is something analogous to that, but it's not nearly as far-reaching as the First Amendment.
Sure.
So, and the same thing here in Canada. I mean, all the terrorist groups that we've listed, so you have a list, we have a list, the European Union has a list, the Brits have a list, the Australians have a list. All those groups are foreign groups. And you're right. I think there has to be this distinction that these guys or gals or whatever have to have some kind of either financing or inspiration or logistics or material support from something abroad. So when the president said he wanted to list Antifa, that's where he ran into a problem. First of all, with First Amendment, Because if you list Antifa, how can you not list the KKK, which has been around, since the end of the Civil War? And secondly, there's no knowledgeable, I mean, I'm not an Antifa specialist by any stretch of the imagination, but I can't see Antifa in the same way you'd see ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Boko Haram or the Tamil Tigers, for that matter. There's no foreign link to that, which is why I think the president got in the hot water over that.
Yeah, and it's just really dumb. There's like 3 or 4 different, like Antifa isn't like a central organization of stuff that's organized like on some larger level that has like chapters of people that go out and take order. Like, yeah, it's a really weird. It just seems like he was upset about political issues, and so that was one of his ways of lashing out, was labeling Antifa as a terrorist organization. But yeah, I'll be curious to see what the FBI turns up insofar as like foreign support of local protesters goes.
Right. Well, and you raised a good point about organization too, right? You look at something like ISIS or Al-Qaeda, which is what I worked on and when I worked in security intelligence for 30 years, worked at like the Islamist extremist jihadis. Al-Qaeda's got a main headquarters, if you want to call it that, and a bunch of branches. There's an Al-Qaeda branch in North Africa. There's one in Yemen. There's one in there's one in Somalia, et cetera, et cetera. ISIS, of course, has about 20 affiliates around the world, all very active. So Antifa doesn't have that. There's no PO box to talk to Antifa.
Yeah.
Similarly, there's no PO box to talk to Incel, so that you come into the same problem there. If you try to list Incel, A, there's no organization. B, it's domestic. So you can't go down that pathway without changing the law, or in your country's case, the Constitution. So anyway, the case here in Canada, it could be precedent setting. We're waiting. I mean, it'll take months and probably years to go to trial.
Yeah.
And then the fact that he's a young offender really complicates things, probably in your country as well, right? You don't learn a lot about young offenders for reasons we both understand. So I guess we'll have to, have a conversation a year from now or 2 years from now when this thing finally happens, and we'll see if I'm right, everybody else was wrong, or vice versa. I don't know. We'll have to sort of, I don't know, be patient, I guess.
Yeah. Let's see. Well, what else? What else is going on in the world?
I want to go back to that first point about, why haven't we seen more terrorism since COVID? Because let's face it, right? Both our countries economically, they're in the shitter, although they're getting better slowly. I've talked to people who work for law enforcement and security intelligence. They're basically on emergency staff as well, because they can't work like they used to for the same reasons you and I can't work, right? You can't go to an office. Yeah. You can't take the train to work, et cetera, et cetera. So you'd think that with fewer people on the ground, so your spies and your cops and all that kind of stuff, there'd be more terrorism. And in actual fact, there hasn't been. I mean, off the top of my head, since COVID, so let's date the 1st of March for COVID. About that time, the number of successful terrorist attacks, or even attacks that were stopped, I can count on the fingers of 2 hands throughout the Western world. None in my country, couple in your country, one in Missouri, I think, one in Texas. Very, very few numbers, maybe 1 or 2 in Germany, 1 in the UK. We're just not seeing that. Whereas in places like Afghanistan or Nigeria or Somalia, I mean, it's business as usual. I mean, I tweet every day a half dozen attacks in those countries every single day.
What do you think it's possible for like Western world where people are quarantining that there's just no point in doing a terrorist attack right now because there are no target environments? Like,
yeah, I've heard that's an interesting point. I've heard that as a possibility because Brian Jenkins, who's one of your country's best terrorism scholars, always said the terrorists want a lot of people watching. Well, if we're sitting playing video games in our houses or having chats like you and I, we're not watching, right?
Oh, I mean, not even necessarily like people watching, but in terms of like people, like ability to kill a lot of people,
like targets.
Because everybody's inside. Yeah.
Well, exactly, and so if you're a terrorist group, you want to do the most damage possible. So if you went to an airport anywhere in your country or my country a month ago with a bomb and tried to blow up people waiting for their flight, you'd probably kill the cleaning staff because there's nobody waiting for a flight, right? No one's taking flights a month and a half ago.
Yeah.
The other thing is what is interesting is that when COVID broke out, this is an actual fact, both ISIS and the Taliban in Afghanistan said, we're not going to do terrorism now because we don't want our fighters to get sick. We don't want to send our fighters abroad because they might catch COVID and they might die. And then there's a group in Indonesia that said, actually, we want our fighters to die because they become martyrs if they get sick with COVID. It's kind of a bizarre way of wrapping martyrdom into a COVID virus. But I think for all those reasons, I just don't think you're seeing the level of terrorism that people thought there would. And I'm still not seeing, this is what 3.5 months in, and there still hasn't been a spike of terrorism in the West. The spike in the rest of the world is the spike we've been seeing since the 1970s. Like nothing's changed in terms of what Al-Qaeda is doing and the Taliban and all that kind of stuff. So You know, Stephen, a lot of people say that COVID-19's changed everything. Well, it hasn't. And it certainly has made our lives a mess.
Hmm.
But has it really changed? I mean, is life never going to get back to the way it used to because of COVID? Maybe. But I don't know. I'm not convinced that everything has changed once and for all, and that the world's going to look completely different 6 months or 18 months from now. And from a terrorism perspective, again, you're seeing the exact same thing. The same groups that were active before are active now, and the same groups that were not active before are not active now. In your country and my country and most of the West, terrorism is a blip.
Hmm.
It's a rounding error. It doesn't happen that often. Now, thankfully, you've got the FBI, we've got the RCMP and CSIS to stop this kind of thing. And we've stopped a number of attacks over the past 10, 15 years. But this is not a frequent occurrence. Now, if you're in Afghanistan, it's a daily occurrence, right? There's a Taliban attack, or there's an ISIS affiliate called Islamic State in Khorasan, letting off car bombs, IEDs, raiding Afghan soldiers, whatever. Nigeria just had one of the largest attacks in its history just took place this week. Like 90 people were massacred in a village in northeastern Nigeria. That's daily. That's par for the course for those guys. It's not par for the course for us.
How has Afghanistan been doing post U.S. withdrawal?
Not well.
Not well.
Not
I haven't
well.
followed anything.
No.
Is the Taliban still fighting with the Afghan government? Or?
Yeah, and the Taliban have come out quite categorically and said, we do not recognize the Afghan government under any circumstance. We will recognize a Taliban government, which essentially establishes an Islamic caliphate / state. And the ISIS affiliate has been carrying out some pretty heinous attacks. About a month and a half ago, they went into a maternity hospital, for Christ's sake, and killed mothers giving birth. Like, I mean, you can't get any lower than that. They killed babies in incubators. Like, you tell me you're a hero terrorist, you're killing a baby in an incubator?
Jeez.
Like, there's no lower form of subhumanity than that, as far as I'm concerned. So no, Afghanistan's not doing well, and the so-called peace process is going nowhere really quickly. But see, this is where it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? So, when Trump's ever going to withdraw, we're going to sign peace with the Taliban, blah, blah, blah. The fact that we are there, and mostly you guys, we pulled out of Afghanistan in 2014, I think. The fact that we were there in the first place was actually causing more terrorism. Because there's nothing that pisses off locals more than having a foreign power come in and occupy you, whether you're benevolent or not, right? You don't belong there. You just do things that locals don't like. So being there caused terrorism. Not being there caused terrorism. I don't know what the solution is.
It
do
seems like
stay longer?
I don't understand why. There must be reasons. I just need to look deeper into it. But it seems like so much of our problem sometimes when it comes to especially occupation of foreign countries from the U.S. is that we just don't really have a clear idea of what the hell we're doing. Like we don't really have like any clear, like as opposed to like how we resolved like the Bosnian situation, like for like Afghanistan and Iraq, we're just like there indefinitely with who knows what objectives. Some of the stuff that I was reading from like the Afghanistan paper leaks, the amount of money we were just dumping into that country indiscriminately with no concept. The only thing we did for Afghanistan was build up the opium industry for the Taliban to like sell drugs. It's insane.
But go back to 9/11, right? Could you not have gone into Afghanistan after 9/11? After 3,000 Americans died at the hands of the Taliban and Al Qaeda, you had no choice, and neither did we as an ally, as a NATO ally kind of thing. So I think that there wasn't a great plan, but I mean, your public would have gone apeshit had you not vowed revenge, right? To find Bin Laden and find Al Qaeda kind of thing. Now the Iraq decision was something completely different. That was a boneheaded move. For all kinds of reasons, mostly political, because someone convinced the president that somehow Saddam Hussein had links to 9/11, which he didn't, and was about to mount a weapons of mass destruction attack against God knows who, his neighbors, the Americans, I don't know who.
I just think it's very interesting that like post 9/11, we use that to justify an invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq. But it was Pakistan where we eventually found.
I know. Yeah, but Pakistan's our friend. We can't shit on the Pakistanis because they're our friends, right? But this goes and okay. How many of the 19 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia?
Wasn't it 18 of them?
15.
Was
it 15 out of
15?
15. And who's the number one ally for your country, not so much my country in the Middle East, it's Saudi Arabia, right? So. But you couldn't go down that pathway. But yeah, you're right. A lot of it's hypocrisy, but a lot of it is dictated by its public relations. It's, what is our public asking us to do? And I think that in the aftermath of a terrorist attack of that scale, which I don't think we'll ever see again. Well, never say never, but that's 3,000 people. That's unheard of.
It's the largest terrorist attack from multiple countries because of how many different nationalities of people were lost in that building.
Exactly. And in terms of the casualty, I mean, you'd have to let off a nuke somewhere in downtown London to kill more people than that. I mean, and I don't think that's going to happen not in my lifetime anyhow. At least I hope not.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that your public would have demanded a response, and the response was to go into Afghanistan, where Bin Laden was at the time, try and find him, bring him to justice, and get your pound of flesh for what happened in New York and Washington. No. So, but I agree with you. I don't know what the plan was. If the plan was to sow democracy and create a modern, secular liberal state.
Yeah, it kind of felt to me like we kind of just wanted Saddam Hussein gone, and this was as good an excuse as any to kind of go in and get like a new government rolling. But oh god,
well, let's not kid ourselves, right? Saddam Hussein was a brutal son of a bitch.
Well, yeah, but I think from U.S. foreign policy, we don't really care about that. It's more just like who's going to represent U.S. interests of the region more than anybody else.
That's true.
And, yeah.
Was it FDR said about Somoza in Nicaragua? He's a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch.
Sure.
So as long as he kind of does things that we what happened in the 70s and 80s, of course, was because of Iran and the revolution in '79. Mm-hmm. Iraq was seen as a bulwark against Iran. And so whatever Saddam Hussein does, we can put up with that because there's a bigger boogeyman next door, and that is the Iranians.
Yeah. I mean, it says a lot that American Republicans and conservatives always talk about like the nobility of U.S. foreign policy, but it says a lot that we left Saddam Hussein there after the first Gulf War. I think it's kind of very interesting. But I mean, yeah.
Yep, I was working intelligence back then too, and it was interesting that I guess the way it was explained to me at the time is that the goal was achieved. They got Iraqi troops out of Kuwait, right? It was all about Kuwait. And then once he got back in Iraq, who gives a shit? Right? Who gives a rat's ass?
There's a funny story to tell for the Republicans to talk about, because my mom is like very like ride or die Trump, Republican, conservative. Like, if America's someplace, because we're getting rid of the bad guys. And it's like, okay.
Sometimes.
yeah, I don't know.
Hey, we're in World War II, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Do you think we're going to see? I know everything's been kind of put on pause after with the coronavirus stuff. Are we going to see an Iranian response to the execution of Soleimani? Do you think, or do you think they kind of like were like fuck it?
Well, we talked about this. Like, it was back in January we talked last. You're not seeing a lot. I mean, the Iranians are really, from what I've gathered. Now, okay, full disclosure, I was an Iranian specialist for about 20 years, but I stopped looking at Iran in detail back in about 05, 06. So. But I still look at it because it interests me, and I still read Farsi, and I just find it fascinating. But from what I've read, I mean, the Iranian economy is in the shitter, partly because of sanctions, partly because it's run by a bunch of ayatollahs that couldn't add 5 cents to get 10 cents.
I heard the coronavirus stuff ravaged their leadership.
Yeah, COVID's really bad in Iran. It's actually one of the worst countries per capita in the world, from what I've read. And they came. So you remember when it broke out in China, right? And then Italy was the next place they got really badly hit. Remember Northern Italy? It was like off the map. Iran was kind of the third country that really badly hit by coronavirus. So somehow there was a link between China and Iran. And they've really taken a huge hit. So my guess is that they're busy just trying to keep the lights on, literally and figuratively, right now in Iran. And they're not dicking around. Well, there's been reports of them, upping their support to groups in Iraq. But Iran's always had the power structure in Iraq since Saddam Hussein left, since you guys finally found him. Iran said, thank you very much. He was our number one enemy. Don't forget, I mean, Saddam Hussein launched a brutal war against Iran in 1980, just after the Ayatollahs took over. And that was an 8-year war that killed millions. I mean, you had child soldiers, and you had gas attacks and all kinds of things. So when Saddam Hussein left, Iran said, hey, this is great. You've taken away our threat. Now we'll meddle in Iraqi affairs. And because Iraq is 2/3 Shia, and of course Iran is 95% Shia, they've got brothers in arms across the border. So for many Iraqis, the Iranians are actually their brothers. At least they're religious brothers, if not nationalist brothers.
My understanding is that regardless of the shared similarity of Shia, whatever that because of how bloody and horrible that 8-year war was, that Iraqis and Iranians do have like there's like a lot of bad blood there. Do you think in general would people, I guess, in Iraq see like, I guess, Iranians as being chill? I remember statements made by the prime minister after the U.S. was so reluctant to give support as of recently that they said they might look to somebody like Russia for more help than the United States, since it seemed politically impossible for the U.S. to help. But yeah, I guess, what does like an Iraqi-Iran relationship look like?
I think it's complicated. So, I mean, religiously, there's a lot in common. Unfortunately, I mean, ethnically, you've got Semites versus Indo-Europeans, because that's what the Iranians are. And, historically, You had a strong Iranian empire under the Shah. You had, all that went on for centuries, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it probably, for some Iraqis, there's no love lost. And yeah, I think you're right. I think the Civil War brings bad memories. Although the Iraqis forget it was Saddam Hussein that started it. He's claimed that he started it because the Iranians were fomenting revolution in his country, and there's maybe a grain of truth. Yeah. I mean, the Iranians haven't found a good way to meddle that they're going to pass up, right? I mean, there's talk about them being in Venezuela and the Cubans, all kinds of stuff. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't think there's a lot of love lost between the Iraqis and the Iranians. But they, because of the power vacuum, the Iranians have had the opportunity to leverage whatever they want in that country, and they've done so very successfully since Saddam Hussein's regime fell back in 2003.
Mm-hmm. Well, what else, man? These past 5 months have been like a whirlwind of things where there were really big issues that everybody just completely forgot about very quickly. Like I remember the first one was like the Australian wildfires, which was supposedly all of Australia being set on fire. I know there's something between that and the coronavirus stuff. Oh, Iran shot down their own airliner over Tehran. I think that had happened by the time we last chatted. I mean, nothing came of that.
But it's funny you mention that, because there's one thing I told myself about 3 weeks ago. I said, I'm getting sick, and I mean, take this with a grain of salt. I'm getting sick and tired when I wake up in the morning and I put my computer on, and I have CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, is my homepage. Every goddamn story is COVID this, COVID that. I'm getting a little tired of COVID. Like, I get it. It's serious. I'm not dismissing it. It's a serious illness. We got to prepare for it. We got to do it properly. But I'm tired of reading, every story is about COVID. So I said, can we not change the channel, change the tune? And the morning I said that, what happens? George Floyd gets killed by the Minneapolis police. And I don't know what your news sources are like, Stephen, but now it's all about Black Lives Matter and systemic racism and defunding police and all that kind of stuff. So it almost seems like, our news feeds can only handle one thing at one time. Like
I think the news feeds very much reflect like the people, right? I think that as humans, it seems we can only keep one fresh issue in our head at a time. I mean, even in regards to like George Floyd, like there was another guy. God, I always butcher his name. Is it Ahmed Arbery?
Oh, the guy in Georgia.
Arbery, yeah, who got like ran down by a few wagons in a truck, and we just like forgot about that guy in a week or two. I mean, I say that like people are still kind of bringing up his name as well, but the George Floyd stuff. I mean, these were very, very strange times, because I'm pretty sure the COVID-19 stuff is like 100 years unprecedented, and arguably like unprecedented period in terms of the spread because of how international and connected everybody is. And then the Floyd riots, I'm pretty sure have been like the most like rioting over every city in the U.S. in the history of the United States, and then in the entire world.
And Canada as well, yeah.
And then also, unfortunately, because I want to travel. There's things I want to go out and do. But we've started to reopen some states in the United States, and I think a couple places that had done it like 2 weeks ago had started to report like record-breaking amounts of cases now, as stuff has started to reopen. One of the scariest prospects that I've been introduced to, that some medical people have talked about, I think Fauci included, is this idea that perhaps this like SARS-CoV-2 virus is here to stay. That this is going to be like a yearly thing where it's just a thing that comes and goes every year that wipes out 100,000 people or whatever, or that it's going to be a longer term thing, which would be pretty sucky.
Well, and then how do we adjust to that, right? How do we adjust our economies? How do we adjust our schools? How do we adjust our daycares? How do we adjust office buildings? How do we adjust all kinds of things? And it's going to take a massive rethink about, so in that sense, maybe if that's true, and I sincerely hope it's not, but if it is true, maybe that will, bring about some significant, not everlasting, but long-lasting change the way that we do things. And I know my life has changed. I mean, I'm an old retired guy, right? I don't have to go to work. I'm not missing the office. True. I'm not, I don't have kids to put in daycare, all that kind of stuff. But for most Canadians, and I'm sure most Americans, like, a lot has changed right now. But the way you carry yourself on an average day, and if it is this wave after wave after wave, my concern would be, when do people get fed up and say, you know what, I don't care about COVID anymore. It happened last year and the year before and the year before. Yeah, so many are going to die, but I can't afford to lose my job for the fourth time in 5 years. I can't afford to not put food on the table. I can't afford to not be able to pay my lease. I'm a small business owner. I can't afford to, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, that'll happen. We'll get there, right? Like, we can't do this again economically. No. Like, this won't happen again, yeah. It didn't have to. I get very disappointed. The U.S. response to this was just unbelievable. like for whatever people say about the U.S., like we have the capability to mobilize so much economic power and might, and we sat for a month after banning travel from China and did nothing to get ready for this, and I think that's just so incredibly sad, especially when I see other countries like South Korea, New Zealand, and stuff just crushed. This COVID-19 thing. They had testing rolled out. They were doing contact tracing. They had isolated people that were spreading the infection. They did such a good job at handling this. And in the U.S., we just totally didn't care at all for like a whole month and a half. I'm half convinced, unless he's just really good at lying, that Trump, honest to God, really thought it was going to be gone in like a week or two. I don't know if you've seen all the compilations, but like he was saying every day for like 2 or 3 weeks, like, it'll go, we got 2 cases, 16 cases, 150, okay, yeah, sure, maybe 100, 200,000 people die. Like that shit, that rhetoric changed like overnight. I was like, okay, yeah.
Well, in fairness, I mean, I'm not a Trump fan, so I don't, I'm not going there. But in fairness, I don't think anybody really felt or had any idea how bad this was going to get. You know, it was a few cases here, a few cases there, and then it was a few more, then it was hundreds, and it was thousands, then it was tens of thousands. Yeah, I as much as I can fault some of the things that were not done or not done properly, it's really hard, I think, to lay blame on people because it's just so, I don't know, you know. It was so.
Man, I don't know. I mean, when we started to see Italy like succumb to the, I understand we've never had it before, but it's like, I guess I imagine like counterterrorism, like you must have like some understanding of like some kind of risk assessment where there's like there's specific names for these things, but it's like low probability, ultra high risk events. Where it's like the investment is relatively small in relation to like your entire budget, but like the payoff is massive. And like it seemed like, I don't know how much you followed in the U.S. It's almost comical that we ran a thing in 2019, in late 2019, called like Project Contagion or something that was basically doing like a sample epidemic outbreak in the United States. And when you read this report, you have to go back and look at the date because it almost feels unreal, because the report is literally like, well, there's a lot of confusion between different school districts and state and local and federal governments because nobody knows what their response is supposed to be. Nobody knows what the PPE is. Nobody knows like how that, and like we saw all of that play out in real time. And we literally ran like we ran like a whole like not a whole trial. We ran like a whole exercise like concerning all of this, and we failed like in every way. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, like I don't expect anybody to be 100% like, you know, have perfect foresight or whatever. But it does feel like other countries responded to this in such a more effective manner than the U.S. did, and I don't see a way of excusing U.S. leadership from the total lack of anything that we did between our between our Chinese and European travel ban. We did nothing. We just sat here. Oh, God.
I do think there could be a lot of blame placed at the feet of the Trump administration for really doing almost everything wrong from the get-go. But getting back to the point you made, I think it's a really interesting one. I don't think we're good at handling low probability, high risk events. Yeah. So, you know, we know they're out there. And let me go one further, Stephen. Like, so when I worked in Intel, I worked in Intel for 32 years. I mean, we never saw pandemics or major viral outbreaks as an intelligence requirement. No one ever told us you need to be up on this thing in case the worst case scenario happens. It's kind of like a meteor strike, right? We know it's going to happen one day. What the hell are you going to do about it? Now, I'm not comparing pandemics to a meteor strike, but we just we didn't have the tools. We didn't have the requirement. We didn't have the priority to say, you know, monitor medical channels or monitor public health officials or monitor nations' health ministers to see what they're saying and what they're hiding, what they're lying about. I think that's changed right now. But I've just written an article for a local newspaper that's a parliamentary newspaper here, saying like, how do you collect on viruses? What do you collect? And if you collect something, who the hell's going to understand it? I don't know about you, but I don't read medical journals and I don't read the latest, you know, vaccine testing protocols. So if you're an intelligence analyst with the FBI or the CIA or MI6 or CSIS or whatever, you got to understand what you're collecting. And if it's all scientific jargon and all this stuff, I mean, I can't do that. So what do? You start hiring scientists to be your spies? Or do you give this stuff to the scientists to look at? I don't know. But I can tell you one thing. I'd be very surprised if any Western intelligence service going forward from this doesn't have at least a moderate effort devoted to staying on top of, and not quite predicting, but kind of monitoring the situation so that the next time this hits, we don't do such a shitty half-assed job as we've done with this one.
Yeah, or no ass job almost. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I obviously we can't repeat history, which is really annoying because sometimes it'd be interesting to see, well, what would have been otherwise. But I mean, I think most people agree that these Floyd protests probably were a lot worse than they could have been because people were stuck in their homes for 2 or 3 months doing nothing.
Yeah.
And it was like,
God
damn, I'm ready to get outside and let's go.
A lot of frustration, a lot of pent up, wanting to do things. And it's almost like a perfect storm, right?
Yeah.
Because this is the first time in either of our countries this has happened. So what is it about this particular time? And I think you're right. I think people are just, they want to do something. They want to get out. And this happened to be the one catalyst. It's too bad it couldn't have been a more positive thing. Yeah. They got people out in the streets to celebrate and dance and all kinds of stuff. And then, of course, the other interesting thing that, I don't know if you've seen this, I've seen it. People worried about these mass demonstrations calling for, police force defunding, Black Lives Matter. What if that spreads the COVID virus more? Because no one's I don't know about your country, no one's staying 6 feet apart in my country at these demonstrations, which is what we're supposed to still be doing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I imagine there'll probably be some spread. I think that for outdoor areas, it's significantly harder to spread things.
Yeah.
Indoor, the air is sterile, or not sterile, but it's sterile. Yeah. But I mean, you'll probably see some rise in infections related to these communities, I would imagine. But
it'd be interesting to see how many legs this thing has. Is it going on now for the better part of 2.5, 3 weeks? It's still pretty strong. Again,
George Floyd protests.
Yeah,
I mean, for the most part in the U.S., haven't they kind of like fizzled out? Aren't we like pretty done? I think at this point.
Well, we're not done here. And it's gone beyond that, right? It's not just about Black Lives Matter. Now it's about police brutality, and then it's about systemic racism. So I saw something this morning that some professor wants every student in Canada to take a course on Canada's history with racism. Okay, fine. I mean, but you're just adding things to this agenda, and how much? I mean, there's certainly some relevant stuff there, and I think that's stuff that should be done. But how much of this stuff is going above and beyond? The head of the RCMP, so our federal police force, was giving an interview yesterday, and she said, it's a woman. She said, "I'm pushing back against this notion that my force is systemically racist." Do we have racists? Absolutely, because every organization has racists in it. Is my force of 25,000 men and women systemically racist? Not from my perspective, it's not. So you can imagine what kind of message or kind of response she's going to get, right?
Yeah.
You can't see the racism in your own ranks. You don't understand what's going on. You're an old white woman kind of thing. Blah blah blah. Mm-hmm. So I kind of wonder, like, how many agendas are we playing with right now?
Well, I think we talk about this a lot on stream. For this issue, unfortunately, I actually think this is one of the easiest things in the world to solve, and it just comes down to getting people out to vote, as dumb as it is. When it comes to policing in the United States, it's a very local thing. Like a lot of people in the U.S. I've seen a lot of like accusations that Obama didn't do anything to clean up the police force. Like, Obama's the president. Like, he's got the FBI, and the CIA and the NSA. Maybe he's got some sway over that because he can put the heads there. But Obama's not going to do anything about the NYPD or the LAPD or the Chicago Police Force.
Jurisdiction.
Yeah, but when you look at these elections for like the mayor in a city is typically the one that puts in the chief of police. These elections have like 20% turnout. And you can imagine with 20% turnout, it's not a bunch of young, poor, minority people voting. It's old, it's Ryan and John.
People like me.
Yeah,
people like me.
Older people that are going out that are voting. And you can imagine these guys probably aren't super fired up over whether or not getting arrested with marijuana 3 times lands them in jail for a minimum sentence, right? These guys don't care about that stuff. So
Exactly. No, I mean, my country's the same. You said 20%. I'd be surprised if in Ottawa, where I am, 20% would be a miraculous turnout for a municipal election. Nobody cares. The issues don't matter. Yeah. And yet they do control budgets. And you're right. They do control police forces. They control emergency response. They control all kinds of things. And, they make decisions on where your taxpayer dollars are going. I pay a ton of taxes each year in property taxes. And all that goes into one pot, and the mayor and the council decides where to put it. Mm-hmm. And if you want to change that, well, get your ass down to the polling center and mark your ballot. And if you don't do that, then shut your pie hole, because you didn't vote. You didn't have a part of that, right? But that's democracy. I mean, if you want to change it, then be part of it, as opposed to pointing the finger when you couldn't be bothered to get off your ass and go vote once every 4 years or once every 2 years or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really frustrating, but I guess we'll see how it plays out. But if people don't actually show up and vote, like, I wouldn't expect politicians to do anything about any of these issues, because why? Like the goal of a politician is to get reelected, and if nobody's going to get and vote on these issues, then you're not going to pay attention to it. They'll pay.
If it doesn't matter to if it doesn't matter to those who are going to vote you in the end of the day, why would you go out of your way to do it?
Yeah,
exactly. But no, I think you're right. I mean, something has to be done, right? I mean, there've been. I mean, George Floyd is simply the latest of a long litany in your country and in my country where this has happened. So clearly something is wrong. But I've also been pushing back. I did a few interviews last week. It is the whole thing about defunding police. Okay. I do think that we ask police to do things they probably shouldn't be doing, like care for street people and care for the mentally ill. That's not their jobs. Their job is to maintain law and order and stop people from killing other people. That's what we give police uniquely in our countries, maybe not your country. We give police, we're the only ones who have the authority to use lethal force. We give them that authority because, they're there to protect us, whether it's gangs or drugs or whatever kind of thing. But we've asked them to do far too many things for which they're probably, I'm not sure they're unqualified, but they're not best qualified. They're probably not best positioned to do either. So why don't we just let them do what they're supposed to be doing, which is, respond to calls, hopefully preemptively before people start dying kind of thing. But why do we have cops putting mentally ill people in hospitals? Why do we have cops?
Or sometimes in the morgue, depending on their interaction.
I mean, who decided that was a good idea in the first place? I don't know. But to me, I mean, I think there has to be a more intelligent funding of policing as opposed to a defunding.
To save you a whole world of pain in case you make a tweet that you end up getting attacked over, that is essentially what it means. I don't know why the messaging is so horrible, but the hashtag abolish the police and the hashtag defund the police. Now, if you ask 10 people what it means, you'll get 10 different answers. But generally, what they'll answer is, well, we don't mean defund the police, like take all the money. We mean reallocate the money into more appropriate sectors that cause a decrease in crime and defensive enforcement. Yeah, that's typically what they mean when they say defund or abolish police.
I don't disagree with you. I think that's exactly what most people mean. I mean, some of the people maybe on the far left would say, well, police forces are just inherently evil and we don't need police forces.
Yeah, and defenders of capital. Yeah, but that's not like the mainstream. Yeah.
No, I don't think it is either. Yeah.
There is a project called Campaign Zero, and I think if you've seen that hashtag 8 can't wait comes from that. And that's kind of an interesting, it's supposed to be like a research-driven set of reforms that could help the police. And they've got like 10 different kind of broad prescriptions that they have, like demilitarization of the police, more community policing, and broken windows policing, like stuff like this. It seems like a good set of suggestions, yeah.
I agree. And, I've worked alongside police a lot. I mean, I used to work for a police force, the Ontario Provincial Police, very briefly when I retired from the security service. And police officers are training all the time. They seem to do nothing but train all the time. So, they're doing their best. Are there bad apples? Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, I think we have to constantly look at what we're doing. And you raised the point of militarization. That to me seems to be the one thing that's where the train went off the rails. We militarized our police forces. You look at some of the gear that police forces in our countries have, some of the vehicles they got. For Christ's sake, it's just like the first brigade kind of thing, right? It's definitely assumed a role. I don't think it was ever intended to be there, but for whatever reason, we decided that's the role we wanted the police to play. So I 100% agree. We have to rethink this thing and do it more smartly as opposed to not doing it at all.
Yeah, it sucks in the U.S. when like one thing that I complain about a lot, especially when it comes to things like racism or sexism, is that in the Western world we've solved like so many of the easy problems. Like most of the easy problems related to racism and sexism are gone. Like you can't tell a woman she can't work there because she's a woman, or we don't hang black people, on trees while villages get around and watch it happen anymore. Everything is so much more subtle now, and the solutions for a lot of these problems are so multifaceted. So we look at the thing that sucks is that the buck kind of stops with the police. But like there's so many other things, like a lack of funding in schools is going to lead to an increase in crime, like dumb stuff like that, or the way that we approach economic opportunity or educational opportunities for different parts of cities playing into how much crime there is. I hope
let me share a story with you. You talk about how things have changed. So my own father, who grew up in Montreal, when he went for his first job after he finished high school, which is as far as he got, he was told by somebody that we think you're qualified, but unfortunately, your last name is Gurski and not Brown. We can't hire you.
Yeah, people forget how recent a lot of things have changed.
1950s.
Late
40s, early 50s.
The one of the stats that a fact that a lot of people don't know is like the first lady in the U.S., the first black lady that went to a non-segregated school is like 65 years old.
I know.
People always talk about this stuff like it's ancient history, and it's like that's somebody's like parents. No.
But I mean, we still have serious problem. I mean, no one's denying that. But I think you raise a good point. We have made some progress, not enough, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
But let's not blow everything up. I mean, there are some good things that have happened.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
it probably isn't going quickly enough. But I think we have to recognize. And again, getting back to the police forces, I mean, these are men and women. Do they make mistakes? Absolutely, because they're human. But I don't think that it's like people accuse even my former organization of being racist. And I'm saying nobody that I worked with went to work in the morning with a racist intent.
Mm-hmm.
They went to work in the morning. They were gathering intelligence, advising the government what was happening. They did their best to keep Canada and Canadians safe, and our allies as well. So let's remember that at the end of the day, right? I don't think most law, or how to put this better, the vast majority of law enforcement officers don't go to work in the morning thinking they're going to arrest a black guy because he's black, right?
Yeah.
Not to say there are some bad apples, as I said earlier, but the vast majority just want to. They're carrying out their mandate. It's to keep the public safe.
Mm-hmm. No. Yeah,
I think
people forget that sometimes when we talk about like institutional or systemic racism. Like these are systems that kind of self-perpetuate. They don't require like every cop to be like this racist, evil person, and to even accuse it as such kind of underplays a lot of the problems for why things feed into it. Yeah.
But the end of the day is that whether we're talking terrorism or we're talking serious violence. Now, your country has an issue with shootings, and there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. My country, not nearly as much. At the end of the day, we live in fairly peaceful, non-violent societies. I don't know how often you come across violence in your daily or weekly or monthly. I rarely see it up here in Canada, at least where I live. And let's sort of count our blessings, right? I mean, if you and I were having this podcast in Afghanistan, there's a good chance you and I know someone who's killed in a terrorist attack recently. Or if you're in Somalia, or if you're in parts of Nigeria, or you're parts of Iraq, Islamic State is making a comeback. Well, I don't call it a comeback. They never went away in the first place. But, a lot of countries have a lot greater problems. This is not to dismiss the problems that we have. We have serious problems we have to address. But I think when you step back and you kind of compare things, what we have had some steps forward, and we need to make more. But let's not dismiss the fact that we're not where we were when my dad was growing up. Or your father or whatever. I mean, things have changed, and they've changed, generally speaking, for the better. Again, we can't stop making progress, but we have made a significant distance so far. At least that's the way that I see it. But someone would dismiss me as part of the white privilege class. So I don't know. I don't know what to do with that.
One thing that I don't know if we spoke about this directly last time. So one thing that kind of worries me about American politics is that it seems like we are on pace to have some pretty big political whiplash in terms of we went from Barack Obama to Donald Trump, and then now maybe to Joe Biden. These are very significantly different political factions that are being represented in the tapas of U.S. leadership in terms of the White House. I really wonder what the implications for that are for like foreign policy stuff. One of the big criticisms I've had of democratic systems is it seems like we're far less able to weather difficult foreign policy decisions than these more unilateral bodies. So, for instance, like China can maintain unpopular political positions because they don't have to worry about winning elections. Whereas in the U.S. or in other Western countries, you're kind of a slave to public support, right? Like a lot of our decision-making regarding Iraq, whether people want to admit it or not, it came down to how popular it was in the public for supporting future operations there. I wonder how the rest of the world responds to, Biden taking office. Like, are we able to reinstate the nuclear arms deal with Iran?
Yeah.
Or are they going to say, well, maybe the next president rolls by, gets rid of it? Do we reset our relationship with North Korea? Like, I'm really curious what the implications are for that, assuming that Biden wins.
I think those are great questions. I think after the initial sigh of release, like, thank God Trump is no longer president, and that'll last for a little while, right?
Yeah.
There'll be a celebratory phase. I don't know. I think a lot of distrust has been built up. I think that the historical position that the United States has had, especially since the end of the Second World War, is kind of the guarantor of peace and the guarantor of Western liberalism, has been severely undermined and challenged. I hope people come back, and I hope that the new government goes back to the Obama way of doing things rather than the Trump way. And I don't see why they wouldn't. But a lot of people are pretty pissed. A lot of Western allies are pretty pissed. I know we walk a very fine line here in Canada because my prime minister, whatever you think of him, he can't afford to attack Trump personally and directly. Why? Because, 90% of our trade is with you guys.
Yeah.
And we know what Trump's like when he gets criticized, right? He throws sanctions on or closes the border or whatever. Yeah, it's a punishment kind of thing. But I think there's been a lot of loss of stature. But luckily, your country still has the world's largest military. It has the world's strongest economy. You have a lot of things going for you. And I'm hoping that people will see what the last 4 years has been like as an unfortunate blip, like kind of like a 4-year mistake. And then we're going to go on to what the United States used to be. Now, sometimes you still piss people off, but generally speaking, I think most people in the West do see the United States as a necessary force as well as a force for good. And I hope you guys can get back there sooner rather than later, because I can't see how much lower it can get right now, because it's bad. It's really, really bad. Ask any Western power, people you talk to them off the record kind of thing. Nobody is looking at what's happening in your country and applauding and saying it's a good thing.
I'm really curious what happens if Trump wins re-election. Yeah,
I don't know. I'm moving to Mars. I don't know. I got to get off the planet because well, again, I'm an old retired guy. What do I care? But yeah, it's I don't know. I mean, if you think about it, are you surprised that he hasn't actually declared war on anybody since he's taken office?
I mean,
he likes to play that card.
Trump
right?
has like 2 people that he could declare war against, and that's Mexico or Canada. Because I, honest to God, don't know if he knows anything about where any other country is on, like he probably thinks Egypt is in South America. It honestly wouldn't surprise me if he did. So yeah, I mean, I don't see that happening. I mean, I think that if presented with the opportunity to, from maybe somebody in his cabinet, maybe he would. But yeah, I don't know. It just doesn't seem like the most popular move. Like, I mean, we bombed Syria's airport after the chemical weapon attacks, and then we killed Soleimani on the chance.
But he does play that card a lot, right? I mean, or certainly he bluffs about it, about getting serious and we're going to take you out, kind of the language he uses, kind of thing. I don't know. I mean, another 4 years, I'd really rather not go down that road right now. I mean, you got your election's 4 months away, or 4.5 months away, 5 months away. A lot can happen in 5 months. I mean, had the election been held last week, I think there's no question he would have lost because of COVID, the economy, all that kind of stuff. What if your economy actually picks up between now and the end of October?
This has been my big worry. My big worry is that, like, and I keep saying this, I really hope I'm wrong. I might be completely wrong. But, like, I feel like once we start getting back into the swing of things, I feel like shit is going to start to, like, explode. Like, businesses are going to reopen. Capital's going to be flowing everywhere. People are going to make investments. People are going to get back to work. I feel like people are going to feel really, really good. Like the first, 2 or 3 days you have after a really bad cold, where you're thankful just to be able to breathe again without having to open your mouth. I hope that feeling, that euphoric feeling, doesn't wash over everybody, and they're like, oh, okay, shit is fine. Let's just keep going. Like, this is okay,
Yeah, well, people have short memories, right? That's the problem.
Yeah.
You talked a lot about things happening abroad, and foreign policy does not win elections. Maybe it's in your country is probably a little more important because of your foreign presence, but I can tell you categorically, no Canadian voter gives a rat's ass about foreign policy
unless there's
an afterthought.
A relevant war going on right now. Like Iraq was pretty politically relevant, but.
Yeah, but it's just not as important as can I afford another loaf of bread? Can I send my kids to school? Can I pay my taxes? Can I buy a new car? Kind of thing. Yeah. That's what people vote for. They don't vote for foreign policy, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. You have any other final thoughts? Anything you're gonna leave us with?
No, it's interesting that there's just so much going on. I'm thinking now, as somebody who, I worked in Intel for 32 years, it really is a challenge to keep up on. We talked about this earlier. We can't seem to handle one big story or more than one big story at a time. I think it's becoming really, really hard to have your finger on the pulse of a whole bunch of things. So I still spend a couple hours a day reading international media because I tweet about terrorism and all that kinds of stuff. I still blog about terrorism, my podcast about terrorism. That takes effort. It takes me a couple hours a day to keep up on this kind of stuff. I think that, and there's a link here to COVID. I'm getting to it. There's just so much information out there that's really hard to. First of all, it's impossible to consume all of it. I mean, I remember when it was actually possible to read 5 or 6, daily newspapers around the world, and you knew everything was going on because nothing else really mattered. Now that's of course impossible. And I think, we're seeing it kind of with COVID, where there's this surfeit of information where it's just like there's so much information out there, and so much of it is so bad. The conspiracy theories. I just read something in today where Anthony Fauci, your kind of head health guy, right? All the conspiracy theorists think he's in bed with Bill Gates to control the world, kind of thing.
Oh, that the injection, the vaccines, machines in you that are going to let him control your,
Yeah. There's just so much shit out there in terms of information. I think people have a really hard time distinguishing what's real, what's not real, and that's an education thing too, right? If you don't take the time to look at stuff and ask yourself, okay, because this is what you do in Intel. You get a piece of info, and the first question you ask, is it true? So I talk to a human source. He tells me X, Y, or Z. Is he full of shit? Is he trying to make me do something I don't want to do, or is he telling me the truth? And then so what you do is you corroborate the information from multiple sources. So one human source and maybe an intercept and maybe your surveillance and all kinds of stuff. Maybe an ally tells you something. We don't do that, I think, as humans a lot. So if we read a sensational story in the New York Post, for example, or on Fox News, we watch, and we find that what's that drug that Trump kept recommending for curing
hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah, that that must be true. So instead of verifying it from a second source that says, no, this will kill you if you take it, we don't. And I think that's the problem. So, but it is hard, I think, for people with limited time. Like, I'm a retired guy. I could read all day. Most people don't have that luxury. Is how do you keep up on the news? How do you corroborate your sources? How do you read multiple sources so you get different perspectives on things? That's what worries me right now, is too many people are going to one source. I mean, I've seen the stats in your country, Stephen. Like, Fox News is the source of news for what percentage of Americans? Pretty high percentage, I imagine. And I don't watch Fox News, but I think most of it's shit, probably. And if that's the only news you're getting, then that's what you're going to believe, and then that's going to inform you, and that's what helps you to make decisions. So my recommendation to anyone out there listening is that take an extra 5 minutes, read something from a completely different source. You may not agree with it, but at least you've got someone else's perspective on things. That's what we did in Intel. I don't see why the average person shouldn't do that at the same time.
I mean, we literally have our president tweeting out, do you know the OANN?
Yeah.
Did you see that when he tweeted about that old guy that got pushed over by the cops? And that guy was like a secret guy trying to scan police equipment or something.
Did you see the Washington Post piece that was this morning saying how to tell if your grandfather is Antifa? It was hilarious.
Oh, I didn't know.
It was absolutely hilarious, an op-ed piece. And it was like, yeah, is your grandfather, the popcorn bowl keeps filling every time you're over at his house. He must be Antifa. It was really quite funny. But yeah. So, I mean, bottom line is that if Donald Trump's tweets are your main source of information, you're in a heap of hurt. Sorry.
Yeah.
There's no other way of putting that.
Man, Trump, that's another big story, too. Section 230, I think Trump trying to make it so that, like, basically social medias can't ban people from their platform. Jeez, but that's, like, completely washed over right now. No one.
Yeah. Well, yeah, who cares, right? I mean, there's bigger issues out there. There's Black Lives Matter. There's still COVID. We're dealing with the same thing here. Like, we here in Ottawa, we're in what's called phase 2. We've got fewer restrictions than we did a month ago. Other parts of the province, there's still fairly high outbreaks of COVID. Other parts of Canada, there's none. So we're doing this very carefully, but that's still dominating the news, right? How many people died today from COVID? How many got sick? Are we seeing transmission amongst young people? Our nursing homes, are people dying at a record rate, kind of thing? So these other news stories that come out, they go, whatever. They kind of shrug. They move on. Not important.
Yeah.
Right? So.
All right. Well, that's the world.
Sorry, couldn't be more positive.
Yeah. I appreciate the chat. If you could have people follow you on like one area, like what do you care about the most? For your Twitter or?
No, I go to my website. So www.borealisthreatandrisk.com, because on there is my Twitter feed as well as all my podcasts, my blogs. I have a whole series of stuff, and they can subscribe to it free of charge by putting their email address. They get a daily digest of all things terrorism and intelligence related, free of charge. There's such thing as a free lunch.
Gotcha. All right, cool. Well,
okay.
Listen, I appreciate talking to you, Philip. If you have anything in the future.
We'll talk again soon. Take care.
Yeah. See you later, man.
Bye.
I think that Trump is right. I think that all political discourse should be banned on YouTube and Twitch streams and Twitter. I think that these people aren't worthy of having political discussions.